Hello everybody, this is Johns Hopkins with Baltimore Heritage, and we're back with another of our 5-Minute Histories videos. And today I'm on the 1500 block of Madison Avenue in the Marble Hill neighborhood, and behind me is Lodge number 3 of the Improved Benevolent and Protective Order of Elks of the World. That organization nationally got started in the late 1800s at a time when the older Elks organization, the BPOE, was whites only. What I thought we'd do today is spend a few minutes and talk about the national group, and then a few minutes and talk about our Lodge number 3 behind me. So let's jump in and turn the clock back to 1898 go to Cincinnati, Ohio, and that's where two gentlemen named Arthur Riggs and Benjamin Howard tried to join the all-white Elks group, and they were denied because they were black, and they were determined to become Elks, even if it meant founding their own order. One of them somehow came across a copy of the Rituals Manual of the Elks organization, and then realized that nobody had copyrighted it, and so he copyrighted it himself. And then the two of them formed the first new order of Elks, the Improved Benevolent and Protective Order, in Cincinnati. From the very beginning, it was meant to show the world that black Americans could act and live morally and with dignity like the white order of Elks espoused, and in fact do so better. I think that's where the improved comes from in the name Improved Benevolent and Protective Order. The white Elks were not happy at all about this, and for the next 20 years sued the Improved Order in state and federal courts all across the country, eventually losing both on their suits against the name, the Improved Order using the name Elks, and on the use of the rituals. The Improved Order, after all, did have the copyright on it. Ironically, one of the things all those lawsuits did was give a number of black lawyers great courtroom experience and help them form a national network of black lawyers. From the very beginning, the Improved Order was dedicated to advancing things like civil rights. In the 1930s and 40s, it fought to try to break through color barriers and labor unions. In the 1950s and 60s, in another connection with Maryland, in addition to this lodge here, it built what they called the National Shrine at the old John Brown Farm in Western Maryland, where abolitionist John Brown had trained his troops before marching on Harper's Ferry. They held a number of national conferences out there for many years. Let me wrap up and say in 1902 at the national level, a women's equivalent group formed called the Daughters of the Improved Order. And with the men's group and the women's group, they distinguished themselves, especially in the fight for civil rights, by reaching across all sorts of boundaries, race boundaries, gender boundaries, class boundaries. So that's the national order. What about the lodge behind me? Well, it got started very early on, 1900, just 2 years after the national group started. And it was formed by two gentlemen also, William Lewis and Silas Jones. They formed in 1900. By 1907, they had raised $5,000 and incorporated. In 1908, they bought their first lodge, a row house not far away from here. In 1916, they had over 300 members, and in 1926, they bought this building behind me and have been here ever since, almost 100 years, just shy of 100 years. Interestingly, this building was built in 1860 by a Quaker merchant named Jacob Burrow. The city's Historic Preservation Commission notes in a great report it did on this building that likely the building behind me was one of few that was built without the labor of enslaved people, because the Burrow family was Quaker. It passed through a number of other prominent white families until 1925, when a black realtor named Robert Young purchased it and then immediately sold it to the Improved Order of Elks. I suspect there was a little collaborating going on for a while before them. After a $100,000 renovation, the Improved Order moved in 1927. Thousands of people thronged the sidewalks here to get a good look. The Afro newspaper called it one of the finest lodges in the country. All right, I'm going to wrap up. Earlier I said that the national chapters had dedicated themselves to civil rights issues, and our local chapter here also did that. Let me mention 3 quick things. One is in the 1930s, a pioneering civil rights activist, Lily Carroll Jackson, who lived just around the corner from here, and her daughter Juanita formed a group called the Citywide Young People's Forum, intending to try to get young people involved in the civil rights movement, and then did one of the first economic boycotts in the country, an activity called Buy Where You Can Work, picketing Pennsylvania Avenue merchants that were white. They would sell their merchandise to black Baltimoreans but would not hire them. Lodge number 3 here behind me was an enormous supporter of that effort, and at least in part through its national network of fellow Elks lodges, helped spread this idea of buy where you can work, and other cities picked up on that, doing similar campaigns as well. The second thing I'd like to mention is not a thing, but a person, and that is Carl Murphy. He was a longtime member here. I believe he served as national president for a while, and he, of course, among many other things, was the publisher of the Afro-American newspaper, what's been called the mouthpiece of the civil rights movement. Final thing, another person I want to mention, is a gentleman named George McMecken. McMecken had graduated in the first class of Morgan College, now Morgan State University, went to Yale Law School, and then came back here and practiced law. He and his law partner, Ashby Hawkins, took on many civil rights cases. One thing McMecken did was he moved into a house not too far away from here that was on a block owned by all white owners. At the time, Baltimore had adopted an ordinance called the West Ordinance, after Councilman Samuel West, that prohibited black Baltimoreans from buying houses on blocks that were owned by 51% white owners or more, and then prohibited white Baltimoreans from buying houses on predominantly black-owned blocks, literally segregating our city racially block by block. Unfortunately, that was an idea that was picked up in other cities like St. Louis and Louisville. McMecken and partner Ashby Hawkins sued here in Maryland against that ordinance, and then with a still new NAACP took it on nationally, and in a case Buchanan versus Wehrle, the U.S. Supreme Court declared that housing discrimination like the West Ordinance was unconstitutional. So I'm going to wrap up and say sincere thanks to all of the Lodge number 3 members today, and all of the folks who came before for fighting so hard for Baltimore and for America. Thanks so much, and we'll see you next time.